It's nice to be back, and we are continuing our study of Daniel chapter 11. I consider Daniel 11, together with the 7 trumpets of the book of Revelation, to be the most challenging of all prophecies in the Scriptures. As we review the history of Greece, Syria, Rome, and its revolution all the way down to our day, in Daniel chapter 11, we see the results of sin and the horror of envy and jealousy and what they cause in humanity. So last time we ended in Daniel chapter 11, verse 9. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom and shall return into his own land. The king of the south was Ptolemy III. He lived from 247 to 222. I'm going to write those dates here on the board. Ptolemy III. So in verse 9, Ptolemy and the third, and he lived from 247 to 222 BC. That's before Christ. We're 200 years before Christ. This is the period in which there was no prophet in Israel. The last prophet was Malachi, and he lived 400 years before Christ. The next prophet would be, Simon, who held Jesus, Anna, who foretold about Jesus, about Messiah, and John the Baptist. In the New Testament. All of them belong then to the New Testament period. But this is the intertestament period. And we know that Ptolemy III had avenged himself for the death of his sister. He kills Laodicea. He takes all of Asia from Mount Taurus to India and returns with an immense bounty and 40,000 talents of silver and 2,500 images of gold into his country. The king of the south shall come into his kingdom, into Egypt, and shall return into his own land. Now we start new territory. We'll go to verse 10. And it says, "But his son shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. And one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return, be stirred up even to his fortress." So here now the children, not the children of the king of the south, but the children of the king of the north. And his sons refers to the king of the north. Seleucus II had 2 children. One was Seleucus III and Antiochus III. And I will do a diagram here. This is the south. Now we go to the north, back to the north in verse 10. And they're going to seek revenge. Seleucus II, also called Callinicus, who lived from 246 to 226 BC. He died before Ptolemy III. He was the son of Laodicea. And his 2 children were Seleucus the third and Antiochus. And Antiochus III Magnus. Magnus meaning great. Well, his first son, his eldest son, took the throne, and he gathered together with his younger brother a very great force, a great assembly. He gathers such a large army, but he is unable to pay them. So his generals poison him That's why I call this soap operas. I mean, you have now the revenge. The children are going to take revenge in the name of their dead father. But the generals of this Seleucus the third get angry with him because he goes beyond what he can pay, and he is poisoned. He dies. He only rules for 2 years. From 226 to 226 approximately to 223, so about 2.5 years there, BC. And now his younger brother takes the kingdom. And it's interesting how the scripture says in verse 10, notice that the first part of the scripture speaks about 2 children in plural. But the second part of the verse only speaks of 1. But his son shall be stirred up and shall assemble a multitude of great forces. All right? And one shall certainly come. That one was inserted, but according to the Hebrew, that is implied that it is only one. One shall certainly come. The one that comes is now Antiochus III Magnus. And overflow and pass through. Antiochus III was 15 years old when he began to reign. Just 15 years old. And now he has this great army, and he regains Syria. He regains the fortress. In verse 10, it says, he shall pass through, then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. That is the same word that appeared in verse 7, where it said, but out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate. That was Ptolemy III that we just spoke about, who died. And shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north. That fortress was Seleucus, or Seleucia. Seleucia. So that was a port city, a very fortified city of Syria. And now we read in verse 10, then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. Why does he return? Well, he returns and be stirred up. He returns to take vengeance for his father and for his I guess grandmother, Laodicea, and he takes over that fortress, Seleucia. A truce is signed between both the North and the South, and they signed many treaties. They were treaties like Hitler's treaties. He signed treaties with Russia. He signed treaties with England. He broke all his treaties. Says, you have the treaties, I have the guns. So we go to verse 11. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler. What does this choler mean? Choler means anger. Now the king of the south is going to take revenge. The king of the south shall be moved with choler and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. This is the great battle, one of the greatest battles, the battle of Raphia. So we go to verse number 11. The battle of Raphia. And the year is 217. 217 before Christ, before the Common Era. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler. This is now, well, Ptolemy III has died. Who do you think comes into the scene after Ptolemy III? Ptolemy IV. Okay, so Ptolemy in the south, you have now Ptolemy IV, and they call him Philopater. And what does Philopater mean? Philo means love or friend, and pater is father. He loved his father. He was going to take revenge now for his father, in the name of his father, the lover of his father. It says, the king of the south shall be moved with choler, with anger, and shall come forth and fight with him. This is a tremendous civil war. I'm reminded of the civil war between the northern states and the southern states here in the U.S. You know, the North always had a bigger army. They always had more money, and they always had more industry. In the end, they won the war. The South had a smaller army. They had less money. They had less industry. They had less railways. All the railways went from the south to the north because they would sell the tobacco and the cotton, and everything would go north. And then from the north, they'd sell all the industrial goods, selling them to the south. But the South had one advantage over the North, and that's why the war lasted so long in the U.S. They had all of the great generals. They had the best generals in the nation. And that's why for the first 2.5 years, the South was unbeatable. They could not be beaten. They were invading the North and causing havoc. They had the great Fox, General Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, who was a professor of military science, Stuart, Johnston, Beauregard, all these great generals. And some of them would die, some of them would live on. The North eventually got one good general and some good assistants, and that's all it took, and that was General Ulysses S. Grant. Unconditional surrender Grant. That's who he liked to call himself. He came from the West, and he was unstoppable. He took over everything. So here, this is a civil war. I call it a civil war because this is the remnant of Alexander's kingdom, and they're fighting the descendants of his former generals are fighting to take over all of the world, all of the known world. And guess which country is in the middle between these fights between the North and the South? It is Israel. It is Palestine. And who is the one that's giving this interpretation? It is Gabriel. The angel Gabriel has been sent from heaven to tell Daniel that his country is really going to be in the midst of it between these two kings fighting. And it would be taken by Syria, then it would be taken by Egypt. Then it'd be taken by Syria, and then it'd be taken by Egypt. And what happens in between? Hundreds and thousands of Jews are going to die in between all this because they were not following the Lord. They were not giving their hearts to the Lord. There was no prophet among them. They were busy squandering among themselves to see who would be the high priest, to see who would be the leader of the Jews. And some would side with the south, and some would side with the north. So now we come to this great battle, the Battle of Raphia, 217 BC. And we read in the text in verse 11, it says, "And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand." He shall set forth a great multitude. The north had a very great multitude. They had 62,000 foot soldiers. They had 6,000 horsemen and 102 elephants. 102 elephants. This Antiochus Magnus had gone all the way to India, and he got elephants because there are no elephants in Syria. There are no elephants in Palestine. There are no elephants in Turkey, Asia Minor. So he went all the way to India, conquered the lands there, and brought elephants. Must have brought a lot of elephants, but he ended up with 102 elephants. And he trained them for war. So this is a battle of the elephants. Write that. These elephants are fighting at this great battle of Raphia. Imagine you see this elephant coming at you. Real huge elephant. And the difference between these Indian elephants and the African elephants were that the Indian elephants have smaller ears. The African elephants have very big ears. And also their toes, the number of of toes is different between these two types of elephants. Now, the South only had 3 elephants against 102 elephants. I guess he didn't gather enough elephants. It's hard to have elephants in the desert of Egypt. But we keep reading the text. It says, and he shall set forth a great multitude. So the north has this huge multitude of soldiers, of horsemen, of elephants, and he's going to take on the south. But the multitude shall be given into his hand. The multitude is given into the hands of the south. The south killed 14,000 northerners and took 4,000 prisoners. 14,000 men were killed from the north and 4,000 prisoners were taken. So the south wins the battle in this battle of Raphia. We go to verse 12. And when he hath taken away the multitude, there it is again, when he has taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up. Ptolemy Philopater, or Philopater, took Jerusalem in this battle. He regains Jerusalem from Syria, and he wants to offer sacrifice in the temple. And he wants to enter the most holy place. And he is stopped. He lifted up his heart. So he returns to Egypt, very angry with the Jews. And the following part of the verse 12 says, and he shall cast down many tens of thousands. Please understand that in antiquity, the biggest number was 10,000. So if you had a lot of people, you would say tens of thousands in the way of counting. So he cast down many tens of thousands. So this is a large number, tens of thousands. Ptolemy IV returns to Alexandria. Eusebius, the great historian of the 4th century, says that he kills 40,000 Jews. Jerome, who was a contemporary of the 4th century AD, says that he kills 60,000 Jews. You know what that means? That many people are just killed, genocide. That means going throughout the entire county of Polk, where we are, and killing every inhabitant in this county, including you. Everyone is killed. Or, if you want to look at it from a different point of view, here in Cedartown we have 10,000 people. It means killing everyone 6 times. Letting them resurrect and killing them again and again and again and again. Or going to Rome and killing half of all the inhabitants of the city of Rome, Georgia. Genocide. He goes about killing everyone. Let's read in the scriptures how God told the Jews, and there's a moral lesson for us to learn here, that we want to seek refuge in Egypt. When the Babylonians came and took Israel, many of the Jews sought refuge in Egypt. Look what Isaiah foretold. And Isaiah lived 700 years before Christ. So 500 years before this, 500 years before, look what Isaiah foretold. We're going to see the fulfillment of this prophecy. Isaiah chapter 31. Isaiah 31, verses 1 through 3. The scripture says, Isaiah 31, verses 1 through 3, woe to them that go down to Egypt for help, and stay on horses, and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen, because they are very strong. But they look not to the Holy One of Israel, neither seek the Lord. Yet he also is wise, and will bring evil, and will not call back his words, but will arise against the house of the evildoers, and against the help of them that work iniquity. Now the Egyptians are men, and not God. And their horse is flesh and not spirit. When the Lord shall stretch out his hand, both he that helpeth shall fall, and he that is hoping or helping shall fall down, and they all shall fail together. So here Isaiah says, not only are the Egyptians going to fall, but you who have gone down to Egypt, you Jews who have gone down to seek refuge from the chariots and from the horsemen and from Ptolemy, avoiding Assyria, you shall fall also. 60,000 fell. Over the weekend, some of us were invited over to Ivan's home, Ivan and Ligia, Dr. Ligia's home. And we were commenting there about the violence that in which we live in our world and how people have no sensibility anymore. And someone made the comment that a child goes through school and sees thousands of murders and sees thousands of rapes and sees thousands of men and women drunk, and they think nothing of it. We've lost our sensibility. We're desensitized. And as we go through this chapter of Daniel, chapter 11, it's of jealousy, it's of revenge, it's of war, and that is the history of mankind when they are not regenerated, when they have not been converted. And don't think you're any different or I'm any different. We're made of the same thing unless we put our trust in the Lord and in the Spirit. There is no thinking of how low you can fall, how low you can become. I think about this astronomer from Florida. She was from NASA, and she liked this astronaut. But there's another lady that liked the astronaut. So she was from Texas, and this astronaut was in Florida, and the lady was in Florida that liked him. So she drove all the way from Texas to Florida, and she had Pampers on. She had the NASA-type Pampers. You know, astronauts have Pampers in space because they can't go to the bathroom. So they just pee in their Pampers, these great astronauts. And so she had some of those Pampers on so she could drive nonstop to Orlando, to Florida, to meet the girlfriend of this astronaut so she could kill her because she was jealous. Drove all the way nonstop. And it was in the news. It was a great embarrassment for NASA. It was a great embarrassment for the astronaut society. You know, here we're the elite. We just have it all together. We go out into space, and you see the same story of revenge and war and jealousy and envy. And this is all the product of sin. This is all the workings of Lucifer in the minds of men. If you come with me to the best palace I have seen in the world, and I've been all through Europe, not to every country, but to the most important ones, through France and England and Spain and Germany and Austria and Italy, all the great kind of countries that ruled the world. And I've seen their palaces. The greatest, in my opinion, is in France. It's Versailles of Louis XIV. And when you go into that room, it's a huge room. It just goes and goes and goes, and it's called the room of war. Of war. Because Napoleon had commissioned all these paintings from Clovis, who is in the scriptures. We study Clovis. We'll study him in Daniel chapter 12 with the prophecy of the 1,290 years and 1,335 years. He was the first French king that converted to Christianity, to Catholicism really, and he fought against the Arians. And you see his painting first of Clovis, the great king of the great plaza that now will promote Catholicism in Europe. And you see all of the other paintings, all of war. And you take any history book of ancient Middle Ages, or modern time, any country, including Canada, and it will be the history of war. It's the history of war. And when you take the Bible, it's the history of war. It's the war between good and evil. It's the war between the devil and Jesus. It's the war between sin and righteousness. And we live in the midst of war. And we cannot let our guard down. We cannot. We are at war. And we're not fighting with the king of the north. And we're not fighting with the king of the south. We're fighting. Look what the scripture says. In the book of Ephesians, please. In the book of Ephesians chapter 6. I want to read verse 6 and then jump on to verse 12. 6 and 12. So Ephesians 6:6 and 6:12. Not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. We do the will of God. When you read Daniel chapter 11, it's doing everyone's own will. And our own will is in bondage, according to Martin Luther. Now go to verse 12. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. We wrestle against spiritual wickedness, real demons that take possession of people and impress them to do evil, to make war one with another. We don't want to do our will. We don't want to do man's will. We want to do God's will from the heart, with goodwill, doing service as to the Lord. That is the great issue here in the book of Daniel. That issue of the will, that the will is surrendered to evil. Come with me to Daniel. Let me highlight that again. In Daniel chapter 11, verse 3, a mighty king shall stand up and shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. Who was that mighty king that would stand up and do according to his will? In Daniel 11:3. Because I'm going to give you a special test on all Daniel 11, that you can really bring this home. This is Alexander the Great. He did according to his will. Everywhere he went, he conquered. And whoever he wanted to marry, he married. And the city he wanted to forgive, he forgave. He did according to his will. We're going to read about another one just a little farther down. Hopefully we'll get to it today. In Daniel chapter 11, verse 16, about Pompey, the great general of Rome. And he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will. There you see, doing their own will. Not doing the will of God, but doing their own will. Is that what you want to do, your own will? Let me tell you, if you do your own will, you'll be sorry for it. Like Alexander, at 30-something, he's dead. 30-something and he's dead from drinking alcohol. And of Pompey, they're going to assassinate him. They're going to kill him in Egypt. And that's really the story of everyone who wants to take the sword shall die by the sword. Those that want to do their own will die under their own bondage. We're in verse 12, and we've highlighted how Isaiah foretold that the Jews would fall. Verse 12 says of Daniel chapter 11, and when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up. Okay, that's the great multitude of the north that he overcomes, even the 102 elephants. And the 62,000 soldiers could not stop him. Ptolemy the fourth. His heart shall be lifted up. He was lifted up. He entered into Jerusalem. He wanted to offer sacrifice. He was denied. He went down into Alexandria, and he cast down many tens of thousands. These are the Jews that he kills. The Jews were God's people at that time. But he shall not be strengthened by it. He was not be strengthened by doing this genocide. The loss of talent, the loss of experience, the loss of productivity, of workforce. Ptolemy died of intemperance, according to our authors Uriah Smith and Dr. Price. We go to verse 13, and I want to highlight almost the last part of that verse, after certain years. Verse 13, for the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. As I'm meditating upon these verses, I'm thinking of how the devil never gives up. If there's one thing we can praise about him, is that he never gives up. He's always constant. He loses and he comes again. So here the north has lost a couple of times. He lost to Ptolemy III. He lost to Ptolemy IV. Now, after certain years, the peace lasted 14 years between the north and the south. And what's going to happen to Ptolemy Philopater? He dies. And now his son is 5 years old. What do you think Antiochus Magnus is going to do, knowing that his enemy in the south, with whom he has a truce, has just died, and the new king is 5 years old? He's going to attack the south. He's going to steal candy from a baby. Yeah. All these lands he's going to start to take, and that was unethical. Ptolemy V now. So after Ptolemy IV, who comes? Ptolemy the who? The fifth. Thank you. Ptolemy V. Ptolemy V. Remember, all these are Greeks. They're all Greeks in Egypt. They're all the descendants of Greeks. Ptolemy V is called Epiphanes, which means the illustrious. Epiphanes, the illustrious. I mean, he wasn't illustrious at 5 years old, but he would become. And he lives from 205 to 181 BC he reigns. That's his reign. 205 to 181. So in 205 his dad dies, and the king of the north shall return and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former. You notice every time they gather, a bigger multitude? As if it wasn't enough before. I'm going to gather more people this time. I think about the devil. After Armageddon, he's going to wait 1,000 years. He's going to think, I just need more people. And then you're going to have the battle of Gog and Magog. That's billions of people upon the earth, all resurrected, going against the celestial city. He has a greater multitude than the former. I'm going to come and take it. Antiochus III Magnus thought it was his opportunity. He wanted to take over all of the lands of the king of the south. For the king of the north shall return and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. So Egypt is at a great disadvantage. The infant, it has a baby king, a 5-year-old. The prime minister's name, who has to be the one who is ruling now, is Agathocles. So he's the prime minister. And the people in Alexandria don't like him because he's very proud, he's unwise, and so the Alexandrians rebel. And they kill him, they kill his sister, they kill his mother, and they kill his associates. This is a soap opera. They go there and they just kill everyone. And we're going to get to these stories of love in a moment. The year is 201 and 201 BC, and Antiochus Magnus invades Palestine and takes Palestine, including Israel, away from Egypt. He goes all the way east to India and reconquers India, and this time he brings back more elephants for war. More elephants. If I just would have had a few more elephants, we could have won that war. With much riches, he regains all of the lost territory that Ptolemy IV had taken away from him. Now we get to verse 14. And I have to change the title. Maybe we should stop here. I want to stop here because when we come back, I'm just going to stop the recording. We'll start again. We're going to call this the Roman soap operas. Verse 14, you have to mark verse 14, please, in your Bible. There are there's several key changes, but this is a major one. We've covered 3 of them. In verse 3 of Daniel chapter 11, that's where you have the end of Persia, the beginning of Greece. Just 2 verses on Persia. Then you have just 2 verses on Greece. In verse 5, you have the great wars between the king of the south and the king of the north. Up until verse 14. Verse 14, history is going to change. Rome is going to enter the picture, and Rome will never leave the picture until Jesus comes back. So let's stop here. Thank you very much.